Imagine the most powerful building in the world, a symbol of democracy, resilience, and American pride, the White House. Now imagine it engulfed in massive orange flames. Imagine the President of the United States fleeing for his life as enemy soldiers sit at his dining table, eating his food before setting the entire mansion on fire. This isn't a scene from a Hollywood disaster movie. It actually happened. On August 24, 1814, during the War of 1812, the unthinkable occurred. The British Army marched into Washington, D.C., and for 24 hours, the capital of the United States was a playground for fire and destruction. But why did this happen? How did a young America let its most precious city fall? And most importantly, what was the miracle that saved Washington from being completely erased from the map? Today, we dive deep into the darkest day in American history. To understand the burning of Washington, we have to look at the war itself. The War of 1812 is often called the Second War of Independence. The United States and Great Britain were at it again. The British were harassing American sailors, blocking trade, and supporting indigenous tribes to stop American expansion. By 1814, Britain had finally defeated Napoleon in Europe. This was bad news for America. Why? Because thousands of battle-hardened British veterans were now free to cross the Atlantic and deal with the American problem. The British leaders, Rear Admiral George Cockburn and Major General Robert Ross, had a clear mission: strike the heart of the American government. But while the British were planning their attack, the American leadership in Washington, D.C. was strangely calm. Many believed the British would never target Washington because it was strategically unimportant. They were wrong. At August 24, 1814, the heat was unbearable. About 4,500 British troops landed and marched toward Washington. They were met at Bladensburg, Maryland, just a few miles from the capital. The American defense was a disaster. Although they had more men, the American militia was poorly trained and lacked coordination. When the British fired their Congreve rockets, which screamed through the air like terrifying fireworks, the American lines collapsed. The retreat was so fast and so disorganized that it became mockingly known as the Bladensburg Races. President James Madison, who was actually on the battlefield, had to mount his horse and ride back to the city to warn his wife, Dolly Madison, and organize an evacuation. The road to Washington was now wide open. While the city was in a state of panic, one person remained remarkably cool. First Lady Dolley Madison. As the British approached, she refused to leave the White House until she knew certain treasures were safe. The most famous story from this day is her rescue of the full-length portrait of George Washington. It was bolted to the wall. With the British just minutes away, she didn't have time to unscrew it. She ordered the frame to be broken and the canvas cut out. She packed her bags, grabbed the portrait, and fled just before the redcoats arrived. Her bravery that day ensured that a piece of American identity was preserved for future generations. At around 8 p.m., the British Army marched into Washington, D.C. It was an eerie sight. The streets were mostly empty. Their first stop was the US Capitol. At the time, it was the only part of the city that was truly grand. The British soldiers gathered furniture, books from the Library of Congress, and wooden flooring into a giant pile in the middle of the Hall of Representatives. They set it on fire. The heat was so intense that the stone columns began to crack and the glass melted. Next, they headed to the president's mansion, what we now call the White House. When they entered, they found the table set for 40 people with fine wine and food, prepared for the president's return. The British soldiers sat down, mockingly toasted to Jemmy's health, referring to James Madison, ate the meal, and then they began the destruction. Torches were thrown into the windows. Within minutes, the president's home was a roaring furnace. The Navy Yard, the Treasury, and the War Department were also set ablaze. The sky over Washington turned a hellish red that could be seen for miles. By the next day, August 25th, it seemed like Washington, D.C. was doomed to become a pile of ash. But then, nature intervened in a way that many called the hand of God. Suddenly, the sky darkened. A massive storm, likely a hurricane or a severe tornado, ripped through the city. The wind was so strong it knocked over British cannons and lifted soldiers off their feet. The rain fell in such a massive deluge that it actually extinguished most of the fires the British had started. According to legend, a British officer asked a local woman, "Is this the kind of weather you have in this country?" She replied, "No, this is a special intervention of Providence to drive our enemies from our city." Fearing the storm and fearing an American counterattack, the British decided they had done enough damage. They retreated to their ships, leaving the charred remains of the city behind. The aftermath was grim. Many politicians suggested moving the capital to another city, like New York or Philadelphia. But James Madison insisted on staying. The White House was rebuilt to hide the black char marks on the white sandstone. They painted the building thick with white paint, which is one of the reasons it became universally known as the White House. The burning of Washington was a humiliation, but it also did something unexpected. It united the American people. It gave them a renewed sense of patriotism and the grit to rebuild better than before. Thank you for watching this journey through history. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more incredible stories from the past. Until next time.